my research was very much interested to investigate the history of the Black History Project in the UK. Most of the people that I speak to on a day-to-day level, their experience of Black history is this repetitive sort of like programmatic approach to Black history that might include heroes and sheroes of Black history, that has an emphasis on African American Black history. So you might go into a library, you might go into a school or a university or the GLA, any sort of cultural space where Black history might be promoted, and you will kind of get a very sort of limited representation of what Black history is from the perspective of a particular organisation, and quite often, you know, sort of not to crudely stereotype these programmes, but there's a focus on individuals such as Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Mary Seacole, and I'm sure it's kind of gotten a bit better than that over the years, but my research wasn't really interested in looking at the heroes and sheroes of Black history. My research wanted to look at this struggle over Black history, which really started in the 1960s with the supplementary school movement and the Black parents and students movement, to have Black history included in mainstream education. So that debate, that struggle for Black history to be taken up within mainstream education is still very vibrant today, and I'm sure you're familiar with that particular discourse or concern about Black pupils, particularly African Caribbean boys, who are, it is argued, disproportionately excluded or are underachieving within the educational system. And as the seminal work of Bernard Cord, who looked at this issue in his book, How the British Education System Makes the West Indian Child Educationally Subnormal, he looked at this particular issue, and the whole sort of like argument and demand for Black history emerged out of those struggles in the 60s and throughout the 70s for Black history to be included in mainstream education. So where it was being taught in supplementary schools, Saturday schools, to cater for Black pupils whose needs were not being met within the mainstream educational system, the discourse shifted from the peripheral to the centre in terms of community activists, parents and students arguing for it to be included in the mainstream curriculum. So my position is today that same argument is going on 4 decades later, and it's really frustrating. It's really frustrating. And one of my one of the issues that I have with that is, why are we as a community, and that's not to say that the Black community is a homogenous, unified group who've all got different perspectives and understandings of what Black history is, but clearly there was a struggle and there still is a struggle for it to be included in mainstream education, in the national curriculum. And why hasn't that happened? I mean, some schools teach it, but it's not something that happens nationally. And so I'm very concerned that we're still in the same predicament. And just by way of introduction, I feel that it's time that we need to liberate Black history from the month of October, from the tyranny of the month of October. And I was really excited to hear from someone here this evening that in Newham, it's no longer Black History Month, it's Black History Newham, which is progress, in that there's a move away from this idea that Black history is something that should be ghettoised within the month of October. And so, as such, the research that I did wasn't interested in a history of Black history in terms of, sort of, as I said, all the heroes and sheroes, but I was interested to understand it as a movement and to kind of understand how the Black community understood Black history and what they, as a community, were actually doing to document, archive, and sort of kind of move it beyond the point of the demand for it to be included in the curriculum to the place where it was being taught in schools. So that's just the starters. I want to open up the floor to some sort of questions, or just to hear from you what your perspectives, what's your experience, what's your understanding, or your understandings of Black history. What does it mean to you?
Are you awaiting questions?
No, I just threw out that question for everyone.
Oh, I see. Right, okay.
You can answer. That's what it says.
Oh gosh. Firstly, let me say this. I'm a bit surprised that you say you no longer celebrate Black History Month. It's Black History New. I'm not aware of that at all, and this is the first time I've heard that.
Right.
Given the fact that I sat on the organising committee, I haven't come across that. So as far as I'm concerned, it's still Black History Month in Newham. I should have to investigate what you said there.
I think the logo is Black History Newham, but the way when they were asking people to respond with ideas or activities, it was very much a month.
Yeah.
So, but they think they're trying to rebrand the school.
Maybe that's an explanation. But I'm going back to the beginning, whereas what do we think Black History Month is? I mean, I think you're quite right in terms of mentioning the education attainment or non-attainment from school kids or boys. But that has to turn around, because there is not so much now as Black boys feel, it's what boys who are in school. So, in some way, I think Black girls are very, very well indeed. So there's some turnaround. But going back from the beginning of Black History Month in this country, it has been foremost on the same place in the United States. That's where it came from.
Yeah.
So we thought, we have a problem here just like they do have in the United States. So we adopted Black History Month in this country. And I do know that there's some voices that are saying, really truthfully, it's not Black History Month. We should have Black History told the whole year. But I think if we were to do that, it would kind of weaken what we're trying to achieve. One of the aims aims were to get Black history and curriculum in schools. Some of that has been achieved. Some schools do have a curriculum, because people tell me that, they teach Black history in schools. But what I would also say that in terms of Black history, we want to exhibit the achievements of Black people in the past and what they've done in society here in this country and in the United States. And the word at large, because a lot of inventions were created by Black people, which is now used throughout the world. The traffic lights, police and motor cars, and various other devices that have been produced by Black people and is used throughout the world. In some ways, therefore, then, it's an achievement for what Black people achieved. And we want the world to understand that Black people were very instrumental in a lot of the new devices that now used to make life easier for the majority. So that's my view, actually, of what history is about.
Thank you. Any more thoughts? Just in regards to what Black history means to you, what is your understanding of it, particularly in the UK context?
My understanding of Black History Month is it's very much based on Windrush and just knowing about my grand's generation who came over from the West Indies, but I would like to know more about what happened in England before then, because I think that there was definitely Black people here before the Windrush, and I think that there's not enough positive images of Black people and the contributions that they've made to England before Windrush. And from what I understand, there was a lot of struggles, there were riots around that time, and Black people were treated really unfairly. And I think it's important, not just for Black people, but for white people as well, and people of other races, to understand that we did make a significant contribution to this country before the Windrush, and so I think it's important that that is included in history. But I feel like Black history should be included in the curriculum, but I also feel that there then comes the question of who's going to teach it. Because I feel that it needs to be taught by Black people. That's my opinion.
That's interesting. That's interesting. And one of the sort of areas of my research is very much kind of like interested in that interplay between the politics of identity and politics of recognition, which is what the Black History Project has been shaped around in terms of the struggles from the 60s through to the 70s and early 90s in terms of ownership. The same sort of debates that have gone on around Notting Hill Carnival in terms of who started the Notting Hill Carnival. The same debates have gone around authorship of Black history, so that if you shift Black history from the periphery to the centre, i.e. include it in the national curriculum, who's going to teach it? Who is it for? And Black history over the last 4 decades or so has been negotiated and renegotiated through different discourses and understandings of Blackness. So, for example, in the early 90s, some of you may well have heard of the concept of political Blackness. And that was a concept that sort of Black and ethnic minority communities organised around to basically support one another, offer allyship to one another, and promote the Black History Project. But then there were tensions in that sort of allyship in that it broke down towards the end of the 1990s because, as Tariq Madood, the sociologist, argues, there are competing ethnicities in terms of scarce resources, and so there were tensions and fissures around funding, around, sort of like why, for example, would an Asian group or a group that's not African Caribbean receive funding for a Black History program that actually has its roots in the African Caribbean community. So those kinds of debates went on throughout the early 90s, and there was a fracture in that sort of partnership between Black and Asian or Black and ethnic minority communities. And it's interesting now that we've come full circle to this notion of inclusive education. Everyone's talking about sort of inclusion in relation to the curriculum, and Black history is now talked about in terms of this very sort of like, it's a big word, intersectionality. How many of you have heard of intersectionality? Go on, tell us about it.
I think you mentioned it earlier.
Yeah?
In terms of ethnic minorities working together.
Yeah.
Particular cause, actually, because, forgive me saying this, remember there was a time when the Asian population was being oppressed and were being attacked and so forth. Mm-hmm. So then they joined with the Afro-Caribbeans as a kind of alliance, fight against things like skinheads and so on.
Yep.
But then the Asian community began to grow and outgrew the Afro-Caribbeans. And whereas, let's say, it came to selection of an individual maybe to lead on a particular group, which actually affected ethnic Afro-Caribbeans, that they were putting themselves forward to head up all of these different organizations, if you like. And if you consider the word BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, that was created because many Asians did not want to become Black. So therefore, that's why you find that BAME came about. So we've broken away into different disparate groups, and that's where the word comes in.
Absolutely, and this is exactly one of the areas that my research wanted to basically accentuate, because the assumption is, particularly in the UK context, the assumption is that Black history is synonymous with the African Caribbean community, but in practice, in terms of the cultural stories that I kind of engaged in with cultural workers, educationalists, teachers, historians, lecturers. I interviewed a whole array of professionals involved in different sites of education, promoting or working with Black history, and each of those individuals had different stories to tell about what Black history meant to them. So you had people who came from a standpoint that Black history was a Black nationalist project or an Afrocentric. There was an understanding of Black history that had Afrocentric orientations. There are understandings of Black history, as we have been discussing, that focus on inclusiveness, and so therefore Black history is open to everyone. There is an emphasis now, particularly across a whole range of sort of educational institutions, where Black history is focused on an intersectional approach. And so that intersectional approach means that Black history is not exclusively synonymous with the African Caribbean community. So we've come full circle again from discussions around political blackness to this concept of intersectionality, which has opened Black history up to various groups, and so in a sense it's very much up for grabs again. And this is what I find quite concerning, because it puts the Black community in a position where nothing is ever consolidated in terms of the Black History Project finding a home, whether it be in the educational system or whether it be in our own institutions. Most of the supplementary schools that ran in organisations, community organisations such as this one, have been underfunded, have experienced cuts and are no more. And so we're still, as I said, in this position where Black history is just this amorphous, sort of like project that happens every October, and nothing has been consolidated. And
why is that? How comes, sorry if I can ask a question, but why is the LGBTQ agenda been able to be put into the curriculum, but Black history hasn't? Do you know why that is?
Yeah, it's been forced in, hasn't it? It's been forced in, because we don't have a choice in it. You can't even take your children out, can you now? You can't object to your children learning about nastiness, basically. It's impossible, you can't.
Do you get what I mean? I find it frustrating that, as you said, we've come full circle, we're still having the same conversations, but how comes these another groups that say that they have their struggles have been able to get their agenda and taught into our schools? How comes Black people, how come we haven't been able to do that?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think in terms of the concept of intersectionality, one of the things that we do have to remember is that within the Black community, Black history is it affects or it impacts a number of different identities in different ways, whether it's across gender, class, disability, and sexuality. And one of the things that I've mentioned to you earlier on today is that the LGBT community have their own unique narrative of their struggles, their community struggles for equal rights, and so every group who experiences discrimination or exclusion, or who has experienced their history as subjugated knowledge, have a right to assert their kind of voices in sort of having that history recognised. And I think you raise a valid question with regards to sort of why is it that the LGBT community have achieved what the Black History Project has not been able to achieve over a period of 4 decades. And I would kind of frame that within the context of the argument sociologist Tariq Madhu put forward around competing ethnicities, competing for limited resources, and also this notion of hierarchies of oppression, where you have different community groups, as I said, struggling for scarce resources. And who knows how resources are distributed with regards to different groups. There was a time throughout the 1990s, particularly within the context of municipal socialism under the GLA, where you had a version of equalities that focused on what I call this holy trinity of race, gender and class, at the exclusion of those, within the LGBTQ community. And, there are arguments in that particular period that why is there so much emphasis on race and gender, but not on the LGBT community. So that tension and that sort of those debates have gone on for quite some time, and I do believe that sort of friction has been there. But I do think the question still remains a pertinent one in terms of why Black history is in this ambivalent sort of like space where, it's just out there floating. I mean, sort of a whole array of programs and projects take place every October, but then, it all kind of like shuts up shop at the end of October until next October, and I'm, concerned as to why it's not included in the curriculum for everybody, not just for the, African Caribbean community, because we've got so much to learn from each other.
Our history is everybody else's, isn't it?
Sorry?
Our history is everybody else's.
Well, so go ahead. Do you want to?
I'm just basically saying our history is everybody else's history. It benefits everybody. It does. It benefits
and do you see that as being problematic?
I see the whole education system as being problematic. Because it's just a seriously, because it's a training ground for the police, for the criminal justice system.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in one end and at the other end to the criminal justice system for our kids. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're being taught, how can I put it, outdated. The education system is really outdated, totally outdated, because a child can pick up a mobile phone and get any information he wants. Yeah, and he's at school being taught old information. No information that's going to take them really forward. Can't see how it works. Really can't. Yeah, we're in a bad state as a people. We're in a bad state as a people, because the minute you mention something, like you say, the Black history has been taken over. It's the same thing. We see that with Notting Hill Carnival. Like you say, 40 years ago, I was still a young person then, and we were being failed by the education system. And 40 years later, the same thing's going on. So there's never going to be a change until we decide that we're going to educate our children ourselves, take them out of school, out of the mainstream schools.
Gentleman over there, sorry, is it, sorry, your name? Winston made a very good point about the fact that where we had for quite a long period of time this kind of reoccurring issue of the disproportionate number of African Caribbean boys being excluded from the system, the problem now is white working class boys, and sort of actually African Caribbean girls are doing extremely well within the educational system.
Our women will always do well.
Sorry?
Our women will always do well.
Okay.
Yeah, they will always do well. Willie Lynch made sure of that. Yeah? Willie Lynch made sure that our women, made sure that our women will always do well. That our boys are not going to ever do well. Very few of them anyway. Yeah, because they're the forgotten lot. They're forgotten. No, we don't really care about them. Or really care about what happens to them. Yeah, so we don't have no institutions, we have none. Yeah, and like you say, we fight over little resources instead of doing it for ourselves. That's what I think anyway.
So what does anyone have any ideas or I don't know, sort of like proposals of how the Black History Project or Black History can be moved forward beyond this stagnation of Black History Month? Do you have any sort of ideas? Do you have a vision for Black history?
I agree with you that we need to drop the month.
Yeah.
It's a all year, it's all year round.
12 months, year after year after year after year, and that month thing is
It's stupid.
it's just insulting.
Of course it is.
I think so.
Yeah.
Appease them, give them a month.
Like you say, it's just all out the same old stuff every year, and the posters are laminated, posted the same faces gone from the walls of the schools year after year. And
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely. You know, and you get Kwanzaa, you might get Kwanzaa sort of, in January.
I think maybe some training for head teachers, and I don't think it's realistic that all Black history in schools could be taught solely by Black teachers. I think you should have a good range of teachers from all races, especially like in Newham, that reflect the pupils that go there. And in fact, ethnic minorities are not minorities in the schools in Newham, where my son goes to Forest Gate School, and obviously he's very much in the minority, and that's fine and all, no cool, but maybe training for head teachers.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as ethnic minorities. It just makes people feel inferior. Yeah, the minute they marginalise you, okay, you feel inferior, and you're going to raise inferior children under the same thing. Yeah, you don't feel that you are equal to nothing. Yeah, so therefore, any little handouts they give you, you thank them for it. I can't see how it works. I really can't see how it's going to really work to help us any which way forward. Yeah, kids killing themselves out there on the street every day. Yeah, and most of them went to school. As soon as they get excluded, they're for the police, they're for the criminal justice system. They pay a lot of people's wages. The minute the school kicks them out, a lot of people's wages get paid.
It's far too easy to exclude children.
It's far, of course it is.
But the cuts in the education system means that the pastoral staff, they used to have a lot more staff that were just there for the well-being of the young people and to help the kids, but interventions for children, and it's all gone.
So do you teach?
No, but I'm sort of close to Forest Gate School.
Right, okay.
Used to be a governor.
Okay.
Just a nursery, but that's where it starts.
Yeah, it does. I had to go myself.
Some questions in the middle.
Sorry, I came in a bit late, but is Black history on the school curriculum? Why isn't that? Is that a main source? Is that one of the main reasons why these Black youths don't have no identity?
That's correct.
Don't have no figureheads, right? Don't have no role models, right? Don't have nobody to look up to. I mean, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, there was Black kings and queens in England, or even in Europe. This was never being taught in school, right? We were only taught that there were only white, right? So, shouldn't you think that should be on the educational curriculum?
Definitely.
Black history. To show these Black kids, but hey, we are somebody. We do exist. We can do things. We can achieve.
I think personally, if the transition, this is what I'm saying. I hear these stories all the time. I hear this story all the time. People have said this, that, this, and that. Person, everything I will take responsibility from the land. We're not going to mount to sell.
That's what I'm getting
That's
to.
why we end up in a position with it right now.
That's right.
If look, we see that change anytime soon. No, it's not going to change. It's going to take its course like a flu. Run its course. Where we used to be the drivers that drive the bus, now we're passengers in the bus. Whoever driving now, if a jacket drive now, make him drive now, he might roll now. So we have to wait our turn until it comes back up. We had it before. So we sit here and talk about this and talk like that, but it's not getting nowhere anytime soon. Unless we can, alright, what is called artificial power? Right now, I'm not going to take penalty this, because Birmingham may come from here. I'm going to tell you, if you drive in the street, I'm in an argument with an Asian woman. Within the space of 1 second.
100 years, man, the
you have a problem.
100 of them.
Your problem,
Pack you.
And me and you now, I come and argue with you for the virgin. Me and you are virgin. Sister, throw them back. I'm not want to get involved with that. You see what I say? So,
Yeah, we're not united.
That's true.
I don't.
The whole family system's broken down.
Well, from what I remember, the grandparents had the idea. There was discipline. And then we came to England, and I remember as a boy, I got the cane.
Me too.
And I got a cane just for not wearing a tie. But then all of a sudden, some woman shouted out, "Take away that from the school, man, because that's teaching the children violence." So discipline was taken out of the curriculum. And the minute discipline went out of the school, and then the government said to the black child, "If you have any marks on your body,
Tell us.
we want to know where that mark came from." So in other words, they created a system to attack the black man. Because they knew we came there with a culture. And they knew that we were loud, we were expressive, and we had morals and standards which our grandparents taught us. They knew that. They'd done their works. So they said, you know what? Let's tear that urbanization up because they're too powerful, they're too dictative, they too have it. Let's get rid of what they got. And by destroying what we had, they knew exactly what they were doing to the black child. Empty.
Shit.
Because if you take away discipline from the black child, you take away self-respect. The black child goes up and thinks, you know what, I don't have to listen to my mom and dad, I don't have to listen to my teacher, I don't have to listen to no police, no boy can come and tell me what to do, and that's the attitude today. Nobody can come and tell me what to do. Not about granddad. Granddad will come and talk to them, they look at you like, well, granddad, that's back in your days. That's what they will tell you, straight. That was in your days.
You are looking for justice from a system.
Yeah.
When you want to put in,
Yeah.
we don't create a system.
That's correct. This is my
Justice,
argument.
right? The man who fired the Katina, you Katina, the man yard, and you look to him now.
Fair pure.
But what I'm trying to show you is that they created a system to destroy it.
Yeah, but that's where you go.
That's
What
like
we had,
We came here for the research era, my place never tell them how we never come with a plan.
we had a culture.
No, listen, the culture we have come and have a strategy.
Yeah.
After Second World War, happened, and they said, bring in the Jamaicans, our people in the Caribbean,
Yeah.
to come in to do clean up in England. Right, different railroad era.
Yeah.
Right? There must be some legislation and some dialogue between the government of Jamaica and British. Whoever that run Jamaica at the time was obviously slave masters.
Children.
So I tell my top people on peers, bring someone and this amount of people come here. They was told they will come here, do some work, collect some money. Our parents tell us the story. Get some money and go back home. Collect my money to stay. Make some money and go back home. But what happened? Many of them they run, you know.
Enough of them.
They run here and they will have our children was born here. Right? And when they born here, you know, they understand, they're subjected to 10 boys. They're subjected to brutality. The government will send for them, you know. They look for them well-being, you know. They just let them go to England like that, you know.
Yeah.
And they don't have nobody where they can sit to or come to them house, little by little and say, what's the condition? Will you be surviving? Why me encounter this and go through this? Not like that, you know. There's no structure. So it was like a bush not growing in England like that, with no structure from himself. And the people born generation come to the culture and one go. There's no man that we have put our money together and say, listen, alright, we're going to buy a school, or build a own school, or build a own church.
That's what we need to do.
That structure never did ever
And there was a structure.
With structure.
So when we tried to go to the bank to get money, the bank would not give us the money. So black people created a thing called partner.
And they've never transferred it to their children or their grandchildren.
We did have a structure.
They never passed it on.
Can I?
Sorry.
It's okay. Can I jump in?
Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because this is exactly what I've been kind of like talking about with regards to the cultural stories that we tell about Black history, the different cultural narratives, the different experiences that we have of Black history. And I get the sense that some voices are not being heard, some voices are being excluded and even suppressed. And I'm delighted to have met Clifford, because as soon as we connected, we were on the same page in terms of our understanding of how we would like to see the Black History Project kind of move forward rather than stagnate. And I just feel that there's so much work still to be done. I actually finished this research in 2005, and I kind of like got sidetracked by my responsibilities as an academic within the university, that I had very little time to turn my research into a book, and that's the next stage for me with this work. I would like to turn it into a book, not just for myself. I've got no interest in sort of promoting myself, but my interest is in a legacy for the next generation, because so much of our experiences, you know, we're not going to be here soon, some of us, and so much of our experiences get lost in the ether, you know. And like you have been saying here this evening, so many young Black youth, they're lost in terms of their identity.
Totally.
You know, you might say that they're African Americans. You know, they're Drake. You know, they're Kanye West. You know, they've got no connection with the struggles that took place in this country throughout the 60s and the 70s. You know, sort of on the part of their parents, on the part of Black community activists and educationalists. They've got no idea, no clue about this, and this is what my research into the Black History Project wanted to record, wanted to document, so that there is a legacy to be passed on to the next generation. But that's just a very small part of it, a very small part of it. I'm of the belief that not that we should just have talking shot after talking shot, because I understand that the Labour MP Diane Abbott in the early noughties, I think from around 2002, it might have started late 90s, she used to run a forum, a conference that focused on the exclusion of young Black boys from the educational system. And it used to happen, I think, every year, and you know, to this day I cannot tell you what that was all about, and it's just disintegrated. And I don't really see any evidence of what was produced from that.
But that's how it is with everything.
And that's how it is with everything.
Anything to do with us. Yeah, until we start to do it for ourselves.
If we don't get a grip, and if we don't get a grip, sorry?
A lot of us don't claim our blackness. We think we're either English or British, and we scorn our own people and our own countries. So this is how it is, so it's difficult to break that.
Yeah.
When they don't want to be Black, they don't want to be African, they don't want to be Caribbean. And you know, that stems from far, you know. When I left Trinidad, my grandparents said, don't speak Patois, you're going to England, you need to speak English. Then we're told, don't be not dark, then in the house.
That's right, madness.
It goes on and on and on.
It's madness.
And also, until the children have no...
In art, politics, in music,
across every subject domain, Black history isn't just exclusively about history, the subject of history. It permeates every subject.
culture,
Domain.
politics.
Exactly. And so, you know, there needs to be some kind of concerted effort to organise, to mobilise and organise around, you know, sort of developing programmes of training to pass on this knowledge, this information this history, this legacy to the next generation. And I would like to see more gatherings like this. I appreciate that this is special in terms of it being the Lucel Tate Lecture, but I do feel that there's a need for more gatherings like this that move beyond, the talking shop, that look at how we can actually share and sort of trade skills and knowledge to do some practical work, some practical projects with young people that engage people like Carla.
Professional people,
What's happened to the multicultural educational project?
That's interesting. It's become the inclusion project. There's been a number of different social policy discourses from the 60s right through to up until now. So you had a policy around integration in terms of the educational system's approach to ethnic minority pupils, and that shifted from integration to one of assimilation, where ethnic minority pupils the emphasis was on them assimilating into British culture, whereas before it was a case of integrating. And then that shifted to a notion of cultural pluralism in terms of social policy, and then that shifted to multiculturalism, which the idea of multiculturalism is this notion of cultural citizenship, whereby the different ethnic minority groups are represented, their cultural needs are represented supposedly in the curriculum, and there's been a shift, sort of in the mid-noughties. You heard Trevor Phillips arguing that the multicultural project is dead, it hasn't worked. Angela Merkel saying the same thing in Germany, and so now everyone's talking about inclusion. And I'm kind of miffed as to what is the difference between inclusion and multiculturalism, because the thing about this discourse on inclusion, I find it's just a real folly, because what does it mean?
Well, in fact, what it means is that it's about assimilation and integration into a culture that is foreign to you. That's, I think, the essence of it.
Yeah.
Because just take a look at the language that we now use to discuss issues of race. We don't talk about race directly. There's very little opportunity to talk about race directly. We talk about diversity. And the policymakers argue that race was too harsh a term. It jarred people in court. So diversity, you're not talking about black people in Ghana.
No.
But when you're talking about race, you're focusing specifically on the issues that affect we as black people. That's how I understood it in the early days.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that it's only black people who can be discriminated against. That's not my meaning at all. But my point is that social policy and the language which is used within social policy effectively is working against our interests, because there's no longer that focus, that sharp focus, which allows you to cut through some of the dross.
I would concur with that point. I really believe that there is a top-down approach to social policy with regards to inclusion, and that top-down approach addresses inclusion of different groups, ethnic groups, or different categories of oppressed or discriminated discriminated against identities, and treats them as a homogeneous whole. And so then what happens is that you have a number of elite representatives who have been through the university system, whether they're black, working class, or a woman, and and each of those different social identities are speaking on behalf of their communities, you know, as if their concerns are the concerns of everybody in their community. And that is the way that inclusion is being promoted through social policy at the moment. It's very elitist. And we've gone back to that sort of impasse of hierarchies of oppression, where some people are more equal than others.
Russian Olympics.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm kind of watching the time covered, and
How does inclusion fit into institutionally racist? How does inclusion fit into institutionally racist society?
that's a good question. That's a very good question.
It can't.
Does anyone?
It really can't.
Does anyone want to have a go at responding to?
Can I just say, I agree with the man over here that we're just talking and talking, and for years we've just been talking and talking, and something starts up and it drops down and it's just fizzled out, and then we start talking again and it fizzles out. If we get something going that is solid, to say that we're putting everybody put that effort into something for black people, it could work, including the people that are not black or whatever, that understands what we're going through, to give a hand, and we just run, I don't know whether to call it an organisation or a foundation or whatever to call it, but something like that is based on us, what we're doing, and like-minded people. It would work, rather than to say you're voting now. And to me, my views on voting is that when you vote, yeah, you're only filling out, what's it called again? When they it's like a census. It's a census to find out how the people are thinking. Have we got them thinking like this? Once upon a time you voted for two prime ministers. Now you're voting for about 10 people who want to step in for prime minister. So you've got all these different categories, and when you start to vote now, it's just to see how you've got the people thinking. Oh look, we've got them thinking like, oh, we've got 5% for that one. Oh, we've got 10% for this one. Oh, we've got them thinking on the way that we want to think, and we've got 50% there. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
that's the way I see it.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with the man over here. We should just be able to put our energy and whatever into it, not start with and this one now putting in another. No, me give up now.
No, but it's reality. That's reality, yeah. Reality.
No one, you know, they're not sticking to it. It's like, I said to me now, I found a dog and it was a very violent dog, and I've got quite a few cats inside the house. It took patience for me to get my dog to calm, to stay in the house. And it's a Staffordshire Bull Terrier with cats. It took me ages to calm. If we put our efforts into that, yeah, what we're doing, like how I did with the dog, we'd get somewhere. But people are giving up. I never give up. I teach a cat to catch a spoon. I had to put anything into that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, we're saying very, very valid. Very valid.
But it's about the effort that you put in to see the result. You can't try and see the result until you put in all the effort.
That's just why I mean, like after these seminars, I used to meet the organizations, yeah? Sometimes the things that come out of my mouth, you know, really come out nice. Sometimes it's because we never expect this thing. Just come to the farm, just music, no people there. But when we step in and see them around there, I mean, I'm trying to hold on this one here now. When we hit and listen to the kind of my grass, and I say, oh, do this. A man who every minority on a paper. A man who knows all that. You can't take up a paper and see move on a paper. Every minority on a paper. And you have to figure out that how you want to let it. And man, don't care how you feel. Now put that on a paper, because you have that amount of power. You can put that on a paper and say, yo, choose what ethnicity you are. You are a minority.
I always tick white.
Right,
I always tick white. always.
Alright, you rock up, you must see it with me. I'm not fucking on this. I'll just show you exactly where my mindset is. Never said this in court, right? You can pick up one of your people. And instant army in a land. I'm saying, you talk about census. They say, let's put it, call it a spade. They say, my children went mad out of the television and burned down, teared down, and went wild. The children went wild everywhere in England. And I sat on my couch and I watched that transpire in front of the television. And I look. I mean, there's
no adult support.
No, you know.
None.
I look and sit to them and say, it's a good opportunity now for them to run, come out now.
And support them.
And I say, yeah? We have some axe to grind too. Yeah? And start with them children, whereby if they get that run down at the field, they have no more strength anymore. I don't know, but they wasn't there. And the children went wild. Mad rampage. Government sat back like that and said, okay, let's restrain.
What's the same for
the book said?
In
foolishness in the bosom of a child. After a while, the child would have not knowledge, you know. You're not going to mess up. Alright, I'm going to like this place I'm burnt down now. Okay, I've got the law now. No, me have you know. No, me have reason now to deal with you know. But before, they might run and wave. They stood back, restrained them. But now, them start. Because them parents never come to help them. So no, do that. No, borrow them. Cut the lamp so short now. Me see them a fling where brainwash parents the other day. I'm missing none of this happening. What are people there? You see everything with that born down in England. When them dead. When they got fling with our ancestors then, when we make them come on.
If you don't support them,
they still go school, they must stop them step. Well, I not go school, I told my grandmother, I not go school. But boy, got this. When them dead, you say, when me see that transpire in front of my eye within this time here, me know say, listen, just lower this epidemic. And this flu, as we say, I make it run your nose. That's right. Me not get involved in the situation because me not organize it. So me not be scapegoat for nobody. And go around and talk for a big forum for them come target me. Right? And when we look to my people and say, yo, one of them. No, talk too much. See, serving right. That's what you're here.
We don't support each other.
And I'm tempting the white leaders kind of space until the thing organized and ready. The fire that me not gone now. Then we will step up. But until then, we love the people, but we just want some right.
Straight up.
Can I just say this? I don't know if we're coming to a close now. But this has been a really amazing evening. I really didn't expect to come here and sort of like have this kind of interaction with you because I was thinking of my talk is quite sort of like technical in terms of like academic language, and obviously I didn't want to come here and put you all to sleep. And so I threw away the script basically because you're all such lovely people and you're my sister's friends. And I have so much respect for Clifford and I just see so much potential here within this community, and it has been a real honour and privilege to meet you all, and I am very impressed with the work that Clifford is doing here, how he has sustained this community centre. Some of the women that I have spoken to this evening who have shared their stories and their history about this particular community project. This is something to be proud of. Seriously, I didn't think these spaces existed anymore. I live in Essex in Buckhurst Hill. Not that I'm rich or anything like that. it's not, you know. So there aren't spaces like this. And so when my sister dragged me here, I think it was earlier on this year, I was surprised. surprised. And when Clifford asked me to come and do the Lucel Lecture, I jumped at the chance to do it. And there's so much more I would like to do in collaboration with Clifford to continue the excellent work that he has done here. And I know that he has this community at heart, and he is old school. He's old school in terms of his love for the black community, and there's not much love, in our society today. And I think that's really important that he has that commitment to the community. So my hope in going away from here today is that you can take away with you some questions for further consideration around this discussion that we've had here this evening, and I will continue the conversation with Clifford about how we can work together on projects to move Black history forward in tangible and practical ways. And so, just to quickly recap, one of the first questions I sort of asked at the beginning of this talk was, what are the roots of the Black History Project in the UK? That's something you can go away and think about for yourself, whether you're just kind of surfing on the internet and you want to do some research and look at, so where did this Black history come from in relation to how it kind of emerged here in the UK? We know a lot about Black history in America. How does Black history shape Black identity in this country? How would you talk to someone in your family, your son, your daughter about Black history and how it has shaped Black identity in the UK context? What kinds of conversations do you have with your sons and daughters about the Black History Project?
It's not only Black identity it shapes, it also shapes others.
Yeah, definitely.
It shapes a lot of others as well.
Definitely. And then also, how is it constructed and represented in different spaces, whether it be libraries, community centres, schools, universities, the GNA? How is it represented? How do you see it represented in those spaces? So I want you to go away and perhaps consider that. And also, what are the cultural stories that make up the Black History Project? Historically, going back to the 60s. You've been sharing some of those stories here this evening in terms of your own experiences with Black history. That is how we begin to own the Black History Project. That's how we begin to kind of come up with tangible, practical, practical visions, or a practical vision to move things forward. So I think I'm going to wrap up and kind of leave it there, and I hope to come back again and sort of perhaps continue this conversation. Thank you very much for inviting me.